In starting off tonight, I would just like to have a quick show of hands. Okay, thank you. That was not all that well participated, but that's okay. I do another show of hands right now, but some of you are tired already from that. But if I were to ask, do you want a very special blessing from God? Do you want a place at God's eternal heavenly banquet? I don't know how many of you would raise your hand and say, yeah. No, I said I'm not doing the show of hands this time, but hopefully everybody would put their hand up for that one. Thank you. Yeah, sounds good. My gosh. Especially if you've never been to a heavenly banquet before. Hopefully it's something you'd be excited about. Jesus tells the story, and as is so often in the case, as we get towards the end of Matthew's gospel, these last several weeks, we've heard Jesus telling stories, telling parables. And these, towards the end of Matthew's gospel, the parables that Jesus tells, most of them are really just getting digs in at the religious leaders. One way or another, through many different parables, he's saying, you guys that are religious leaders, you haven't done your job. You haven't brought people closer to God. You've turned them away. You haven't made it easier for them to come to God. You've made it more difficult. You think you know God, but you don't. You think you've got a special place with God. You don't. And so he told this story tonight, directed at them. They got the message. They were the ones who had been invited to the banquet by the king. And yet, they refused. You got to remember, though, when Jesus told his stories, generally there was crowds of people around him as well. And maybe these Pharisees, these chief priests, these scribes, they weren't in the very front row, eager to hear what he had to say. They were probably, standing in the back there in their own little groups, making their comments and all of that. But the other people who heard the stories of Jesus, for the most part, they were the common people. And the common people generally were very, very poor. It wouldn't be surprising that the ones who heard Jesus talk about this banquet, this wedding feast, had never been to a banquet in their lives. Had only dreamed of an incredible feast, like the one that Isaiah spoke about in the first reading. To a poor desert people, to be able to picture a banquet with all kinds of wonderful foods and wines and just, there might have been some of them that were standing there going, banquet hall. And I'm not sure how many of you get that reference, but regardless. So those who heard the story, and they heard people give their excuses. Well, not going to come. Can't come. They must have thought, these people are idiots. Who would turn down a chance at a banquet? What could possibly be more important? And yet, there always seems to be a reason, an excuse. And especially if, oh, well, thanks, it sounds wonderful, but gee, I was just at a wedding feast that the king was putting on last week. I don't need another one, thank you very much. We deserve a little slice of heaven. But very often, we can be too quick to say, no, that's okay. No, I've got it, Lord. You're fine. If you know the prayer of St. Francis, and I'm hoping you do, it's one of our most wonderful Catholic prayers. It's something that we should know by heart. Confirmation kids, I'm going to put that on you. Before your confirmation, I'm going to expect you to know the prayer of St. Francis. You know your Our Father, you know your Hail Mary, you know your Glory Be already, so, you've got 3/4 of the basics done already. You just have one more to go. Okay, you got time. We're not doing this by next week, but you should know the prayer of St. Francis. Because in the prayer of St. Francis, one of the things that it says is, it is in giving that we receive. And you talk to people who are involved in our parish ministries. Those who are willing to give something of themselves. And almost universally, what they will say is that I feel like I get so much more out of it than I give to them. When I'm willing to go and spend time with these elderly people, they lift my spirit up so much. When I make time and go and teach the kids, work with the servers, whatever it might be, I'm just aware of how special it is. Because when we have giving hearts, life has meaning. If we are just self-centered people, then our world is very small because it revolves around us and only us. Christ says to us, come to the banquet. Find a little slice of heaven. Find the joy in your life. Find the meaning in your life. Well, how do we do that? It is in giving that we receive. Very quickly, go to confession to you just a little bit. When I was in the seminary many years ago, we would have banquets, maybe a couple times a year, where they would cook some extra special food and they'd put out the tablecloths and the nice silverware and all of that. And we seminarians, we had to get all dressed up in our formal suits and the whole bit. But the banquet was never really just for us. Usually we were having the banquet because the archbishop was going to be there. Ooh. Or we had a bunch of priests coming in who had graduated before, and the seminary was trying to get a little more alumni money. These banquets, I always made it a point of being on the dishwashing detail. I would always sign up to wash the dishes. And some of the faculty even noticed that. And they said, wow, John, you're always willing to serve, to help make our banquets that much more special. That's really wonderful. And I blushed and said, thank you. And I said, that's not why I'm doing it at all. I was a dishwasher every time because, one, I enjoyed, for some reason, monkeying around with our big old dishwasher that we had, of taking the dishes and putting them in the racks and hosing them down really good, and then running them through this big steam thing and all of that. And I know that if that was my idea of fun, that says a lot about my childhood, but never mind. But the other reason that I wanted to wash the dishes was so that I didn't have to sit in the dining room after dinner was over and listen to all of the speeches from the archbishop or the alumni priests or whatever. So what others took as, wow, John, you're really, being generous. You have a truly giving heart. No, I was being self-serving. I wasn't doing it for the good of the community. I was doing it for me. That's not what Christ is calling us to. He's calling us to have generous, giving hearts. He's calling us to realize that each of us does have something, some gift, that others can benefit from. And if we're willing to believe that, if we're willing to believe in ourselves, then God will find a way to take what we want to offer and have it matter to others. And we will give, and we will find that feeling. Oh, this is amazing. I get more than I give. It is in giving that we receive. So Christ says to us, please, come to the heavenly banquet. It doesn't have to be through a parish ministry. There are many of you that minister in lots of different ways. Maybe there are some of you that you have an elderly or a sick parent living with you, and you're caring for them every day, even though sometimes it may be difficult. It may be hard to keep your patience. That's ministry. Those of you parents, your kids' schools ask so much of you, or you just want to make your kids' schools as good as they can be. It's ministry. It would be great if you were able to find something here in the parish that would help you to express that, but it's not essential. You got to give, though. You got to do something. You can't let your heart simply be a taker. Because when you do that, it starts to die inside. it's harder to find that slice of heaven, that joy that Christ calls us to. So please remember, it is in giving that we receive. And Christ wants us to receive. He wants us to know the joy of the banquet of heaven. And as we build his kingdom, as we bring others peace, reassurance, relief from their loneliness, we experience that joy. And God says to us, great, I'm glad you got some now. Keep it up. You ain't seen nothing yet.